Welcome to the Mercy Hill Church podcast. This podcast is a collection of sermons and conversations intended to stir up your affections for Jesus. We hope this content helps you know and tell the story of Jesus better.
We're in the middle of a series called Unrivaled through the book of Colossians. So if you have your Bible, turn to Colossians chapter 1. We're going to pick up in verse 15. Here's the deal. We got a lot to cover today in about 6 verses, but every phrase is packed with something incredible. So we're going to move pretty quickly and then come back to the big idea at the end. So I need you guys to hang in there with me. Can you do that? Great. Colossians chapter 1. Let's just jump in together. Verse 15. This is Paul writing about Jesus. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. The beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. Now, if you remember the context that we said a couple of weeks ago, Paul is writing this letter to the church in Colossae. He's never been there before. In fact, this church was founded by a friend and disciple of his who went back to his hometown and started this church. And what's happened in Colossae is Paul's gotten the report that they have a false teacher who's now a part of the church, who is basically teaching Jesus is great. He's really, really great, but we need to incorporate some of these other beliefs and practices from our former pagan religion that we believed, from our some Jewish influence, from the culture around us. And so what's happened is all these things are getting combined together. And this passage is a response to that particular context. Now, there's a lot that's packed into these 6 verses, and it can get very confusing. So here's what I want to do, something we don't normally do, but I want to fast forward you to one phrase in verse 18 that's going to help us understand the big idea here. So in verse 18, Paul writes, he is the beginning, the firstborn of the dead. Don't worry, we're coming back to that phrase because that's a little weird, right? But see, here's what he says, that, or so that, for this purpose. I think this is the concluding phrase of the entire passage, that in everything he might be preeminent. Now, the word preeminent, according to the dictionary, means of having paramount rank, dignity, or importance. To be outstanding or supreme. To have the first place. And so here, Paul is saying to the church at Colossae and to us, Jesus is supreme. He has the first place in all things. He is without peer, and nobody else is close. The center of this passage, the center claim that Paul is making, we could say it this way: Jesus is without rival. Now, we use that phrase all the time, and when we say without rival, someone doesn't have a rival, what we mean is that a person or a company is so dominant in a particular space for a particular period of time that no one else can come close. So in sports, we would say, hey, this player has been so dominant for so long, nobody can even compete with him. And so that would include examples like Serena Williams with 23 Grand Slam titles in women's tennis without rival. Michael Phelps, 28 gold medals without rival. Wayne Gretzky, 2,857 points. And some of you who aren't into hockey, you might not know, the second closest person is 1,000 points behind him. Dominant, without rival during his period of time. Now, we might talk about that in business too. So business without rival, completely own or dominate their market. And so you would talk about examples like John Rockefeller and Standard Oil, or Steve Jobs and Apple, or Jeff Bezos and Amazon. But notice what Paul is saying here. He doesn't say that Jesus is without rival, completely dominant, preeminent in a particular space for a particular time. Like many of these examples, he says Jesus is predominant in everything. So it's not that Jesus has no rival in business or sports, Or maybe more appropriately, he's not saying that Jesus has no rival in the moral teacher space, or that Jesus has no rival in the founder of a religion space, or that Jesus has no rival in the God space. He is saying Jesus has no rival in all things for all time, and it's not even close, preeminent. Now, why would he say that? How does he come to that conclusion? Well, that's where we back up to verse 15, and we're just going to hit this phrase by phrase, so you guys hold on. He is the image of the invisible God. Paul's saying here is that Jesus is the visible representation of a God who cannot be seen. And this isn't just Paul's thoughts or impressions on Jesus. In fact, Jesus said the same thing about himself. And so in John chapter 14, Jesus is teaching his disciples, and one of his disciples named Philip pipes up. And he says this, he says, "Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us." Hey, Jesus, here's what we need for you to do. Could you just show us precisely who God is and what he's like? And that'll be enough for us. We don't need anything else. Like, that's a pretty, like, not a big deal, you know? It's like me, like, you know, like, hey, listen, if you, like Jeff Bezos, if you would just give me like $27 million, like, you know, it's like not a big thing. You know what I mean? Like, that'll be enough. That's fine. That's probably plenty, you know? Show us the Father. Here's how Jesus responds. Verse 4, John chapter 14. Jesus said to him, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." What is Jesus' claim here? Friend, you've seen me. You've been walking around with me for 3 years. You've seen the way I interact with people. You've seen the works that I've done. You've seen who I am. If you've seen that, you have seen the Father. Or we could say it the exact same way that Paul says it. Jesus is saying, I am the image of the invisible God. When you see me, you see God. And so we don't have to speculate or guess about God's character, his intentions, or his ways. If you're from where I'm from, we would say it this way: Jesus is the spitting image of God the Father. He perfectly embodies exactly who he is in character and nature. Jesus is revealing who God is. He is making him known. So Paul says, hey, if you want to know what God is like, where you look is to Jesus. You can look a lot of other places to get some speculation as to what God is like, but if you want the real deal, where you look is to Jesus. He is the image of the invisible God. And then he uses this phrase, the firstborn of all creation. Now, what on earth does that mean? At first glance, the way we use the word firstborn, we would think that means Jesus was born in some way. He's like the oldest of a bunch of kids, that Jesus is some sort of created being. And there have been people throughout history who have held to this position that Jesus was a created being. Going back to the 4th century, Arius created a big controversy because that was his belief. And even today, Jehovah's Witnesses hold to the belief that Jesus is the first of all created beings. But is that true? Is that the actual way that we need to understand this phrase, or could it be talking about something else? So we need to do a little work together. You guys ready to do some work? What we need to do is we're going to follow 3 steps of good biblical interpretation. Here's step number 1. What is the immediate context? What is happening around this confusing phrase in the text that could give us an idea as to what it means? Well, we just read verse 16. What does verse 16 say? For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. Well, it sounds to me that what Paul is saying is that Jesus is the one who created all things. So it'd be really, really strange for him to repeat several times, one verse later, that Jesus is the creator if he was trying to teach us that Jesus is a created being. So let's keep going. The immediate context says, well, it seems like Jesus is the creator. Maybe there's something that I'm misunderstanding here with this word firstborn. Number 2, what's the context of the book? Now, the context of Colossians, remember, is Paul is writing to people who are confused about who Jesus is, who are incorporating some other beliefs from a variety of places, including their formerly pagan way of life that taught that there's a bunch of demigods, right? Wouldn't it be really, really strange for Paul to say Jesus is just like one of these demigods or one of these little g gods that he is at the same time writing his letter to counter against? So we go, okay, this doesn't seem to line up with the purpose of the letter. It doesn't seem to line up with the immediate context. And so we're going to go to step number 3. Is there a clear passage of Scripture that can help us understand the unclear passage of Scripture? Well, yeah. In fact, we have the very words of Jesus in John chapter 10, verse 30, he says plainly, I and the Father are one. Jesus claims that he's not a created being, that he is of one nature, one character with God the Father. You go, well, maybe that's not super clear there, Brandon. I don't know. It seems like you're overclaiming it. Well, if you continue in the passage, there's some Jewish religious leaders who hear him make that claim. In verse 31 of John chapter 10, it says this, the Jews picked up stones again to stone him. And Jesus answered, I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you going to stone me? Verse 33, they answer him, it's not for a good work that we're going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you being a man make yourself God. So we know from this text and some other places that Jesus claims not to be the firstborn or a created being. Jesus' claim is that he is God himself. And he's making it so clearly in John to that audience that they get it and they're like, oh my gosh, this guy just told us he's God, let's stone him. So there must be something else happening in this phrase, the firstborn of all creation, that maybe is just a phrase that we don't use, or the biblical author is using it in a way that we don't immediately understand. So what could that be? Well, the clearest example would be in Psalm 89:27, which the psalmist is writing about David. And David we know, we've talked about him in Psalm 23, right? Shepherd becomes king. You remember that story? So here's what the psalmist then writes about David. I will make him the firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. Now, was David the firstborn in his family? No, he's the youngest, right? So what was the psalmist could he even be talking about by claiming that David is the firstborn? That's not the way he's using the term, right? What he means is that David, in his rise to king, would take the first place before all people in all the earth. This phrase is being used metaphorically, not to mean the firstborn son or a created being, but exactly what we've already seen in verse 18, that David would be preeminent, supreme, ultimate, first over all. And so Paul is making the same claim about Jesus, that in the entire space of all creation, there is one being who is supreme, ultimate, preeminent, without rival, and it is Jesus. Nothing in all of creation comes close to rivaling Jesus. Why? Back to verse 16. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or authorities or rulers, all things were created through him and for him. The reason that Jesus is without rival, Paul is saying, is because he is the creator of all things. If it exists, Jesus created it. Heaven and on earth, things that we see here and now and things that are unseen in the spiritual realm. He uses this phrase, thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. We're not exactly sure particularly what Paul is referencing is some spiritual powers that the people are dealing with or earthly authorities like Caesar. But the big idea is this: the most powerful person or being that you have ever heard about in your entire life was created by Jesus and does not come close to rivaling Jesus' power. There is nothing in all creation that comes close to who Jesus is. No other little g gods, no other spiritual beings, no other rulers or authorities, no other king like Caesar, no other empire like Rome, no country like the United States or Russia, no teacher, no matter how compelling they are, no other religious leader. He is saying they all pale in comparison to Jesus. And then he uses this phrase, all things are created through him and for him. And since everything that is created is by him and through him, then all creation itself points to Jesus. The majestic mountains point to his far superior majesty. Breathtaking landscapes point to how breathtaking Jesus is. The endlessness of the ocean points to his endless faithfulness and supremacy. The ferocious hurricane points to his power and might. The calm stream points to his perfect peace. There is nothing in all creation that rivals Jesus. Creation, then, Paul is saying, is like thousands of scattered puzzle pieces, each one showing us a little bit of what God's like, each one a small example of his handiwork. But Jesus, the image of the invisible God, is the complete portrait, the perfect picture of who God is and what he is like. And then verse 17. He is before all things. So he existed before everything. He is eternal, and in him all things hold together. Not only is Jesus the image of the invisible God, and Jesus is the creator of all things, but Paul is saying he is the one who currently is sustaining all things. He's the one holding the world together. He's the unifying principle. He's the piece that makes all the other pieces make sense. He ties it all together. And there have been other great rulers and other great leaders who have made significant contributions to our world and history. Caesar Augustus began the Pax Romana. Shakespeare, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, the list goes on and on and on of people who have made significant and meaningful contributions in the world. But Paul is saying Jesus is the one that makes the entire world make sense. He holds it all together. He is the creator of all things who took on flesh to live among us, showing us who God is and at the same time showing us who we were designed to be. Truly, he is saying Jesus is without rival. But Paul doesn't just stop there with creation. He continues with the work that Jesus accomplished when he came to the earth. Let me set a little context for you. This is going to be important. Every moral teacher, religious system, or self-help guru believes there's something wrong with our world. Every single one. And every person who follows them believes there's something wrong with our world too. That's why you need them, right? And so if you want to unlock the key to weight loss, you get on the little Instagram page where like the person is telling you how you can unlock that. There's a problem that's being addressed. For some religious teachers or moral leaders, the idea would be, hey, everybody just needs to tap into their inner divinity, watch Oprah more, read her magazine, and you're going to find out more about yourself, and then the world is going to be a better place, right? You're like, that's an old reference. Oprah's a while ago. You know, like that's, yeah. Some religious teachers, leaders are going to say, hey, if we just had enough knowledge, if you got the right knowledge, then it's going to set everything right with the world and in your life. But the Bible teaches that the central problem with people is not a lack of knowledge, and it's not that we're not tapping into something inside of us. The central problem the Bible teaches is that we are fundamentally broken. That there's something that happened, this thing called sin, that cracked us, fractured us, prevents us from being the people that God created to be. And in that, our sin is actually an act of rebellion and has placed us in an estranged or a distant relationship with God. And not only that, but this problem doesn't just affect individual people, but this problem affects the entirety of the world. That the whole world around us is broken and needs to be repaired or restored. And so in the next 3 verses, Paul is going to give us this massive cosmic picture. And he's going to say that Jesus is without rival in his work to reconcile people to God or to solve that fundamental problem. He's going to say that Jesus is the best, and it's not even close at solving the issue at the heart of humanity and the world. So here's how he starts, verse 18. He says that Jesus is the head of the body, the church. The church is this collection of people that Jesus has restored into a right relationship with God. And Paul just says Jesus is in charge of that. Not the guy who's teaching you all this false stuff, not any other source, not your favorite YouTube preacher or whatever. They're not in charge. Jesus is in charge. Well, why does Jesus get to be in charge? Well, here's what he says. He is the beginning, the firstborn of the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. I love how Eugene Peterson writes this in the message. It says, he was supreme in the beginning, and leading the resurrection parade, he is supreme in the end. From beginning to end, he's there, towering far above everything and everyone. He's saying not only was Jesus supreme in the beginning of the world as the creator, but he was supreme in the beginning of the work to reconcile people to God. And Jesus finished that work with his own resurrection. He is truly the beginning and the end of salvation. His work is the work that completely solves the world's greatest problem. And then we get to this phrase, the firstborn. What does it mean? Again, the firstborn from the dead. How is he using this term? Well, we know Jesus was not the first person to be raised from the dead. Elijah raises the widow of Sapphira's son, 1 Kings. His disciple Elisha raises the Shulamite woman's son in 2 Kings. Jesus himself raises 3 different people in his life. The widow of Nain's son, Jairus' daughter, and Lazarus. What he means is not that Jesus was the first person to ever be resurrected. He means that Jesus' resurrection is supreme or ultimate or preeminent. It is different in a unique way. That all of these other resurrections were limited. Lazarus, raised from the dead by Jesus, but eventually died again. And his resurrection didn't have any sort of implications for other people. What Paul is saying is Jesus' resurrection is fundamentally different because it is for eternity. Jesus is currently alive and well, and it is a pattern for the future resurrection of everybody who will trust in Jesus as Lord and Savior. That's why Eugene Peterson uses that phrase, the resurrection parade. That Jesus is setting off something that is unique and different, and the mental picture is a massive parade of people who were dead, now alive, resurrected, following Jesus in this parade through the city, going, check out what God did. That's why his resurrection is first, the firstborn of the dead. And it's not just that his resurrection from the dead is a solo event. That would be crazy enough. But then it has implications for your life and my life. That it means all who trust in him will be raised as well. And so his resurrection is without rival. There's nothing like it in all of human history. It sets off a movement that is unparalleled. Then he continues, verse 19. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. What does he mean here? He repeats the same thing later in Colossians chapter 2, verse 9. It says, for in him the whole fullness of deity, of God, dwells bodily. Saying Jesus is unrivaled because he's God. In the beginning, he is God, the creator of all things. And in space and time, dwelling as a person on earth among his creation, Jesus is fully God. We call this the incarnation, which just is a word that means in the flesh. And it's this idea that God took on flesh and came to live inside his creation. And Paul wants you to understand very clearly when Jesus took on flesh and came to earth, when he was born as a baby in Bethlehem, when he grew up as a child, when he taught, when he worked miracles, at no point in time in that entire bit of history was he not fully and completely God. His humanity did not dilute his divinity. He is 100% man, 100% God. His incarnation, Paul is saying, is without rival. We've never seen anything like it. It is beyond compare. There is nothing that comes close to this idea of God putting on flesh and dwelling among us. And then in verse 20, it says, and through him to reconcile, there's that word again, to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. He's saying Jesus is the most qualified, and it is beyond compare to reconcile us to God. That the greatest problem in our world, that we are fundamentally broken, estranged from God, and that all of creation is broken with us as well, that Jesus solves that problem. The best way for us to understand this phrase is to say it this way: if someone or something in all creation will be reconciled to God, it will be through Jesus Christ. Things here and now, people here and now, things in heaven, in the physical and spiritual things. There is no other means for this sort of reconciliation of all things except for Jesus. And how did he do it? Paul says it's through the blood of his cross. That Jesus reconciled to God all people who would trust in him because Jesus paid the penalty in full for sin in our place. Now, this is important because this is different. Most religious systems going back in all of history have a list of rules to obey, have a work to engage in, have a spiritual practice to employ. And many of them are the same as what we have as Christians. But here, Paul is saying Jesus completely did the work in and of himself to reconcile people to God. That his cross is without a rival. And he uses that phrase, again, all things. Heaven and on earth. So let's just think about this for a second. Hang in here with me. You guys are doing great. He is saying Jesus' death and resurrection are the means that God used to put the world back together again, not just you. Do you understand the implication? He's saying Jesus' death and resurrection is the means that God has used to set the entire cosmos right, not just you as an individual believer. Think about the scope, if it's of all things. The religious practices of people, of self-help gurus, of whoever you might find, could be very beneficial to get your life back on track. But Paul is saying there is no one in any time, in any place, in all of history who has done the work to put the entire universe back on track. That's just Jesus. We might be able to think of a way that our certain spiritual practices that we could recommend to other people could make us right with God. That is in the realm of possibilities. We could probably think, oh, I know how to be right with God. We just need to do this, 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 and this. But that's not just the argument that Paul is making here. He is saying what Jesus does is not only set you right, he sets the entire universe right, the entire cosmos right. And I don't think any of us in this room would be so arrogant to think that our obedience to God or our following of spiritual practices or us finding the right self-help guru is enough to set the entire universe right. But Jesus did. And so Jesus is without rival in his work to reconcile people to God. So what does this mean? What does this mean for us? We just went through a whole lot, right? You guys are like, man, that was a lot. It was like an onslaught of information, Brandon. What does this mean for me? Several years ago, we decided to take a family trip out west, and we were going to camp, right? And we're going to pull this camper that we borrowed from my parents. You guys have heard this story before, but here's the thing. I had never really done that before. I never really pulled a camper before. I never hooked it up. I'd never done the work, right? And so we decided to take a warm-up trip before our big trip out west. We're going to do a bunch of national parks, right? The whole thing. But our warm-up trip was we were going to drive just a couple of hours away to Southwest Georgia to Providence Canyon. Anybody ever been to Providence Canyon? It is a cool place. You probably went there on your 4th grade field trip, right? Here's what Providence Canyon is. Providence Canyon is actually a canyon, series of canyons, collection of canyons caused by poor irrigation practices by people. It's like not even a part of God's natural landscape, right? But it's super cool. So you can go down in the canyon, you can look up, you can see all the different layers of the earth. There's a lot of different colors. It was a lot of fun, right? A lot of fun. But you fast forward 6 months later, and I'm not standing at Providence Canyon looking over the edge. I'm standing at the Grand Canyon looking over the edge. And here's what I could tell you from that experience. Looking out at the Grand Canyon is a much different experience than looking out at Providence Canyon. As cool as Providence Canyon was, there is something awe-inspiring about the Grand Canyon that you just can't even put in words. Here's what Paul is saying. There are a lot of good things that have happened over the course of history, a lot of good teachers, a lot of good contributions, but all of it pales into comparison to what Jesus did, who he is. It is like 100 times the experience of going from the Providence Canyon to the Grand Canyon. And the only response that we should have as a result of this picture from Colossians chapter 1 and the reality of who Jesus is the same response that we should have staring out at the majesty of the Grand Canyon. It's just awe. It's amazing. It should capture everything about us that God took on flesh. The creator of all things loved us enough to come and save us by laying down his life and resurrecting from the dead. The person who created all things and for whom all things were created for died for you. It should strike up awe in our hearts. And this leads us to a very difficult phrase that some of us, even some of us in this room, will struggle with. Paul is making a claim for the exclusivity of Christ. That word just means that Jesus is unique or set apart or the only way for us to be reconciled to God. And in 2025, it's not really a super cool thing to believe. But in response to what we've just read, the uniqueness of Jesus is evident. He is God in the flesh. Unlike any other religious teacher or leader, he is not claiming to be a way to God. He is claiming to be God himself. And when Jesus lays down his life on the cross for us in our place, he is providing a unique, a predominant, a supreme, a first among all other ways, way for us to be reconciled to God. He is not offering a system or a process or a way of life or a set of beliefs to adopt or a collection of rules to obey. He is offering himself as the way to God. And his resurrection is unique. And unlike Paul is making this claim to his original audience who are struggling with these variety of different beliefs coming in, he's saying, unlike every other religious leader or any other thing that you have ever heard a teaching from, Jesus is resurrected from the dead. He is alive and well. And unlike any other thing that you've ever experienced, his resurrection is the first one of a bunch more who are promised to come, which can include you and me. He's saying definitively, it's Jesus and nobody else comes close to rivaling him. He's not claiming to be a religious teacher. He's claiming to be the one that all the teaching and even all creation itself points to. He's not claiming to provide a way that works for you. He is claiming that he is the beginning and the end of all things. Jesus is without rival. Which, interestingly enough, also then leads us to the inclusivity of Christ. You see, because if Jesus is powerful enough to create the entire world and everything in it, and if Jesus is able to come in person, lay down his life and resurrect from the dead, if Jesus is offering himself above a way, that means that anybody can get in on this. Anybody. There's no ethnic or race requirements to come to Jesus. There's no ethical requirements to come to Jesus. There are no political affiliations that you have to maintain to belong to Jesus. There's no standard of obedience that somebody has to conform to come to Jesus. It is open to rich and poor, powerful and weak, majority culture, minority culture, to Americans and Afghans. Black, white, near and far, there is no need to make restitution first. Jesus is able and willing to reconcile all who comes to him, which includes you. That's what happens when you get more than just a way or a religious teacher. You get the God of the universe. I love Scotty Smith says this: sovereign grace, not karma, rules. In response to this, if this passage is true, sovereign grace, not karma, rules. What does he mean? At the beginning of all things, God exists. He's saying behind everything that happens in this world is a God who loves people enough to come and die for them. That sort of grace, who is in charge, holding all things together, that he is behind all things. Which means that we do not believe and do not have to succumb to all things. What goes around comes around, right? I mean, that's karma. You're just going to get what's coming to you. He's like, no. You're going to get what Jesus provided for you. And which is great news. For the materialists among us who believe that all there is just matter, the good news is you no longer have to be in terror of the universe. There is someone behind the universe. We are not at the mercy of the whim of a world of random chance. For the person maybe in this room who rejected God a long time ago, I just want you to know you no longer have to be at the mercy of a universe that is beyond control. For those of us in this room who believe that we have to acquire a certain amount of knowledge in order to be saved or have a fulfilled life, the good news of this passage is you do not have to understand every fact of the universe. You just have to know the one who is in charge of the universe. For those of us who chase the up and down of the economy, and we had a really bad week last week, this means you are not at the mercy of the ups and downs of the stock market. You know the one who holds all things together, and you know he is gracious because of his death and resurrection. So sovereign grace rules over all things. But, this is what Jared Wilson says, Jesus Christ will never be somebody's add-on. He'll only be the end-all be-all. That's what's happened in Colossians, right? The church just wanted to take Jesus plus whatever else we could get. That's what happens in your life and my life. Man, yeah, Jesus is great, but man, I need this, and this. I'm going to pull all of this stuff together. But the supreme creator of all things, the one who holds the universe together, the one who laid down his life for us on the cross, the one who has never for a moment not fully been God, the one who was resurrected from the dead and is currently alive, will not be an add-on for you. So you and I have to ask the question, who is first place or preeminent in my life? Who's supreme in my life? Who is beyond rival in my life? Who's first place in my family? Who's beyond rival in my marriage? Who's first place in my profession? Who's first place? Who's supreme over my mission or my ministry? Who's supreme over my time? Who's first place in my loves and my conversations? Who takes first place in my pleasures and my leisures and my hobbies? Who takes first place in my eating and my play and my sports and my arts and my music and my worship? Who is supreme? And I think if Paul was with us today, he would look at you and say, it's Jesus, and there's nobody even close to who he is. So we're going to respond in two ways today. The first is perhaps this picture of who Jesus is should drive you to repentance. The word repentance just means to change your mind. And maybe you are caught up in a lot of competing rivals for space in your life with Jesus. Maybe you've never come to know Jesus, and your life is full of all sorts of rivalry, all sorts of things competing for your attention. Today is the day where you could see Jesus clearly as being beyond compare, without rival, and you could come to faith in him. Believer in Jesus, today is the day where perhaps in response to who Jesus is from this passage, you go, no, I have to make Jesus first in everything. Here at Mercy Hill, we say one of the marks of a disciple is a worshiper who says Jesus is Lord, and Jesus is Lord of all. Then the second response today is just worship. If this passage is true, then by looking into these 6 verses today, we looked out at the majesty of the Grand Canyon. By seeing these truths today, we were looking into something beyond explanation. And the only response for you and for me is awe and wonder and praise. To say, Jesus, if you are beyond rival in all creation and beyond rival in your work, then you deserve all glory and praise and honor from me.
Thanks for listening to the Mercy Hill Church podcast. To keep up with the life of Mercy Hill Church, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We believe the Christian life is best experienced in community. If you're in our area, we'd love for you to join us. If not, we'd love to help you get plugged into a local church near you. Have a great week.